Heraclitus was one of the most influential philosophers of the ancient world. Despite the fact that his wisdom is only available in the form of fragments now, that which is left of Heraclitus is nonetheless worthy of study. So let's explore the philosophy of Heraclitus and offer connections to the ideas of other philosophies. Of the greatest questions of metaphysics is the being versus becoming problem. The opposition between being metaphysics and becoming metaphysics. The former, being, takes substance as its principle, seeing things as static and enduring. The latter takes flux as its principle, seeing all as flowing and changing. The most common understanding of Heraclitus places him as one of the greatest proponents of a becoming metaphysic from his concept of panta re, translated as all is flow, and Heraclitus' river statement is seen as the prime example. The most popular version of this statement is actually from Plato's Cratylus, where it is written, Heraclitus, I believe, says that all things pass and nothing stays, and comparing existing things to the flow of a river, he says you could not step twice into the same river. The same idea exists within the fragments of Heraclitus, where the 12th fragment can be translated, upon those who step into the same stream, ever different waters flow. From each moment to the next, the water at your feet is new. The river is not the same as it was but a moment ago. It is flowing, unstable, and forever different. This is why you cannot step into the same river twice. And this doesn't only apply to the river, but to the riverbank, the surrounding forest, and the rest of the world. From moment to moment, everything that there is flowing, changing, and becoming anew. As Heraclitus wrote, the sun is not only new each day, but is always continually new. During the same time as Heraclitus, the Buddha would espouse a doctrine overlapping with Heraclitus' belief that all things change. While Heraclitus' panta re would point out the principle of change in the world, the Buddha would point out the principle of change within ourselves. The concept would be known as anitya, best translated as impermanence. Buddha has said, all things that are pleasant and delightful are changeable, subject to separation and becoming other. No mental state, thought, or belief is permanent and unchanging. By seeing that, not only is the river changing from moment to moment, but we too are subject to impermanence. The Buddhist finds the principle of anatman, or no self, non-self, that each of us are without a permanent underlying being, since the we that we are is constantly changing. This is why A.K. Rogers writes that on top of Heraclitus' statement that you could not walk into the same river twice, a Buddhist would add, the same man cannot step twice into the same river, for the so-called man who is only a conflux of mind and body never remains the same for 2 consecutive moments. Thus, it is held in the Buddhist tradition that our inability to accept the truth that all things flow leads us to attachment, selfishness, and suffering. Shunryu Suzuki wrote that, when we realize the everlasting truth that everything changes, and find our composure in it, we find ourselves in nirvana. Not unlike the Buddhist, Heraclitus takes those who realize the fundamental transiency of all things to have wisdom. In an aristocratic manner, Heraclitus would value these wise individuals far above all others, who he took to be blind sheep, having said that the many are worthless, the good are few. There is now another reading of Heraclitus' river statement and philosophy of flux. Rather than taking Heraclitus to emphasize a purely becoming metaphysic, some believe it to be a statement on the coincidence of opposites, with an alternative translation to the 12th fragment mentioned above, on those stepping into rivers staying the same other, and other waters flow. This is taken to suggest that we do not call a flowing body of water a river despite its constant change, but instead that constant change is exactly what makes it be a river. A river can only stay a river insofar as it continues to change its contents. The moment it does not, it is not a river. At the same time, it endures and dissolves, approaches and departs. However, this reading is not to suggest that becoming plays no part in Heraclitus' metaphysic. Instead, through placing becoming on the same level as being, Heraclitus still articulates the cruciality of process. On this reading, Heraclitus believes in flux, but not as destructive of constancy. Rather, it is, paradoxically, a necessary condition of constancy, at least in some cases, and arguably in all. Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher of the early 20th century, understood Heraclitus in the former way, of articulating an entirely becoming metaphysic. However, this latter understanding, which displays an interdependence of being and becoming, may hold greater similarities to Whitehead's own process philosophy. Whitehead was unsatisfied with what may be called the classic view, held by most of Western philosophy, which makes an unwarranted dichotomy between a substance and its predicates, attributing permanence to the former and changeability to the latter. One would expect that Heraclitus found a similar displeasure with purely being metaphysics. Whitehead, like Heraclitus, emphasized the flux of things, having written that the elucidation of meaning involved in the phrase all things flow is one chief task of metaphysics. But Whitehead's philosophy is not as simple as all things flow. It is a complex system that involves both being and becoming. In the inescapable flux, there's something that abides. In the overwhelming permanence, there's an element that escapes into flux. Both Heraclitus and Whitehead sought the introduction of becoming and adjustment of our being metaphysic to incorporate the most important principle of life that we have been overlooking, change. Though Whitehead may not have seen it as so, Heraclitus may have been one of the earliest predecessors of his process philosophy. Whether one interprets the river statement as that of a becoming metaphysic or not, opposites play a great role in the philosophy of Heraclitus. Opposites as understood here are the same as in the conventional sense, black and white, life and death, summer and winter, but there is a deeper aspect in Heraclitus' understanding, as when he says, what is in opposition is in agreement, and the most beautiful harmony comes out of things in conflict. This deeper aspect is that of the underlying unity of opposites, or the logos. This idea can be understood as dialectical monism, an ontological position that holds reality as a unified whole expressed in dualistic terms. The same is present, living and dead, waking and sleeping, young and old, for these things having changed are those, and those things having changed are again these. What is present is the unity, as when Heraclitus says, unity is from everything, and from everything is unity. Most do not see through the opposites to the deeper harmony. They do not comprehend how being at variance, it agrees with itself. It is a harmony turning back upon itself like a bow and a lyre. However, there is hope that, by understanding the essential interdependence and harmony of things in opposition, we may come to recognize the hidden harmony and underlying unity of things. Heraclitus' conception of change plays an intricate role in his dialectical monism. Change is brought about through the interplay of opposites, the conflict and strife that is the expression of the logos. Change is the action of the logos. This conception is once again seemingly contradictory, like the second interpretation of the river statement, for there is unity and stability through plurality and change. Reading about this aspect of Heraclitean philosophy brought to mind early Daoist cosmology, finding its roots within an ancient creation myth, wherein two dragons emerged from the primal emptiness, embodying the force of change, and generating the 10,000 things through endless creation and destruction. One of these dragons created the Yijing, or Book of Changes, and the book's hexagrams sought to name and describe the changes of the cosmos. These hexagrams were made up of 6 lines. Each line was either solid, representing yang, or divided, representing yin, thereby representing the two complementary cosmic principles whose dynamic interaction produces the process of change. As in the presentation of the first hexagram in the Yijing, it is said, the way of heaven is all change and transformation at the hinge of things, where the unfurling nature of each thing itself is perfected. When its dragon head rears up among the innumerable things, it unites the 10,000 kingdoms in wholeness and peace. Such a cosmological understanding of the Yijing developed around the time of Pre-Chin Daoist philosophy, offering an interpretation of the text as Proto-Daoist philosophy. This interpretation can continue through the Tao Te Ching, where this origin is given the label Tao, giving a succinct Taoist account of the dialectical monism. The 42nd chapter states, the way begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets the myriad creatures. The myriad creatures carry on their backs the yin and embrace in their arms the yang, and are the blending of the generative forces of the two. All this is not to say that the two dialectical monist philosophies are identical. Certainly the concepts of logos and Tao differ. In a larger understanding of logos, it can refer to the mind's capacity to rationally discern the order of the world, and it can also refer to the spoken word. Tao does not share this connection to knowledge and words. described as nameless, and at times preferring people to lack knowledge. In line with his dialectical monism and philosophy of change, Heraclitus argued for relativism. The sea is the purest and impurest water. Fish can drink it, and it is good for them. To me, it is undrinkable and destructive. This relativism suggests that no particular human perspective, no specific human value or belief, and no name we apply to a thing is as fixed and stable as we may perceive, conceive, or believe it to be. Each is subject to change, and is utterly dependent upon its opposite. Typically, Heraclitus makes his point by way of an apparent paradox. Therefore, moral distinctions between good and bad and other dichotomous moral judgments are perceptual and not real, as it is simply dependent on what we regard to be its opposite. Just as early Daoist philosophy had shared Heraclitus' belief in dialectical monism, so does it share Heraclitus' belief in relativism, this time through the ideas of ZHUANGZI, when he said, "Everything has its that, everything has its this. From the point of view of that, you cannot see it, but through understanding, you can know it. So I say, that comes out of this, and this depends on that, which is to say that this and that give birth to each other. But where there is birth, there must be death. Where there is death, there must be birth. Where there is recognition of right, there must be recognition of wrong. Where there is recognition of wrong, there must be recognition of right. Therefore the sage does not proceed in such a way, but illuminates all in the light of heaven. He, too, recognizes a this, but a this which is also that, a that which is also this. His that has both a right and a wrong in it. His this, too, has both a right and a wrong in it." Fire takes a large role in the writing of Heraclitus, as when he says, "The order, the same for all, was made neither by gods nor by humans, but it was always, and is, and will be, fire ever living, being lightened in measures, and going out in measures." But there is a question on how to interpret Heraclitus' fire. Many in the past have taken Heraclitus to be yet another early monist, advocating for fire as the ultimate reality, the sole substance that everything is made of. Yet this view runs contrary to the previous two Heraclitean ideas that we've just explored. In the view of dialectical monism, Heraclitus does believe in a deeper unity and harmony pervading things, but not as substantial fire, instead expressed through conflict of opposites. And a material monism, as suggesting the world is one substance, would not allow for real change, only illusory change. Hence, to accept the Heraclitean concept of fire as material monism is to reject both prior concepts. Instead, there is an understanding of the Heraclitean fire that is more harmonious with the previous concepts. The substance of choice for the alleged monism is already of question. Heraclitus chooses fire, which is characterized by movement and the process of turning source into ash. It is of the least substantial things one can think of to comprise everything that there is. Heraclitus said himself, "Fire, having come upon them, will distinguish and seize all things." Heraclitus' choice is thereby paradoxical, using fire to point to the ideas that process is more real than substance. Now that's all I have to talk about today. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. And until next time.